Good evening, everybody. How you doing? My name is Wesley Cable, the host of Obsessed with Wine, and it's Friday night, which means we've got another exciting interview for you. Tonight, we're going to be welcoming Chris and Elisa Jones from Elisa Christopher Wines all the way in Texas, and I'm super excited to talk to them about their wine journey and all the great wines that they're making out there in Texas. So let's go ahead and get them in here. You guys there?
Yes.
Good evening. How you doing?
Doing great.
Excellent. So I did my homework on you guys. So so the first thing I want to know is I see here that you guys both grew up on vineyards. Is that true? And if it is, tell me about that. What's it like to grow up on a vineyard? And did you work on it or did you guys just grow up around it?
So I helped my dad plant his vineyard near College Station, Texas in 2007. So a little bit later, but I grew up around wine. My dad actually went to high school in Northern California. So spent time there. He went to Vanden High, for those of y'all in the California area. And then he graduated from school in California and came to Texas A&M. So kind of remained in the Texas area, but he always talked about being in Napa Valley in the 60s. And what do you smell? What do you taste in the wine? So I grew up drinking wine. We had some family land, so that's why he planted a vineyard. And yes, Chris has done stuff with me out there too. So everything from planting to pulling up dead vines to chopping off vines that got hail damage to replants, pruning, you name it. We've done everything in that vineyard, and yet we're still going to plant a vineyard of our own on our property. So you can't have enough doing it just once. You got to do it over and over.
Yeah. So what was it like though? I mean, growing up did you appreciate it when you were younger? Like this is so beautiful and amazing, what we're able to, that we're able to do this, or did you kind of take it for granted just being a young person?
I think it just there's a lot of hard work in it. Yeah. And it's, I often joke my blood, sweat, and tears are in that vineyard, but that is definitely the case. So despite growing up around it, it's still something I wanted to do. I was like, well, I could take this and make this even better than we already have things. So I guess it was kind of that passion to do so, but I wanted to do a lot of world travel before then. So kind of came back to it later in life.
So do you guys still have the family vineyard?
We do. We will actually harvest that. That is one of the earliest Texas crops to come in. So that'll come in for us around the 11th of July. Because harvest in Texas never ends. We will start on the 11th, and I think the last of our fruit this year will probably come in late September.
Wow, that's a long harvest.
Yes.
Wow.
A lot of it has to do with the sparkling program that we're doing, so we're picking earlier for the higher acid.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you about that later, but let's talk about it now. The sparkling program. So that's unique that you guys are going to have all the equipment there on your property to do the sparkling wine. So talk about that and what made you decide to do that.
So it was something I always wanted to do, make sparkling wine. When I brought along Chris for this wine journey, when he started drinking wine, the only thing he liked was sparkling wine. Okay. As it
was my gateway drug.
It was his gateway. But, as you and I talked, my longest relationship is with the Schramsberg Sparkling Wine Club. Love them dearly. We love sparkling. We drink sparkling wine in our house almost every night. So that is definitely a passion for us. And I said, we have a lot of grapes in Texas that we can make sparkling wine with, and we don't need to necessarily be constricted to Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Pinot Meunier. We have a plethora of other things. My travels in southern France, we had a wine made out of Trebbiano grapes, of course, and I loved it. I thought it was a great aperitif. So our first vintage is actually out of Trebbiano grapes grown in the Texas High Plains. And we will be able to disgorge and dosage that in October when our equipment arrives. It's been sitting on lees. And we'll have that to release to our wine club members in December. So just in time for the holidays.
Wow, that's pretty exciting.
So it was kind of funny that when we started this journey, she said, you know what, we'll make some sparkling for you because you like it so much, not knowing the
amount
expense
of effort
and the effort that goes into it. I like to tell my friends, it's like, hey, guess what? I just bought a Ferrari, but instead I have sparkling equipment in a garage instead. So,
and it's all the same cost, it's totally fine.
Yeah. Wow.
But, it's been a fun journey.
That's what I thought was fascinating, Elisa, when you told me that you guys were going to be buying that equipment, because I know a lot of wineries who they don't do that. They have someone else do that part for them because of the expense of the equipment and all that. So that's why I think it's so cool. So, I mean, in your area, are there other wineries who have the equipment or?
No, we will be the first with all the equipment. People have been doing it kind of an old fashioned way. There's one neck freezer, I think, floating around in Texas. People have used just the manual tool. I just got one the other day from LaFour, but it's to pop off the crown cap and the bidule to get those all out. But we will be the first with all the equipment. And we're actually going to help a couple other wineries this harvest with some of their sparkling wine programs, because that's where we want to go. We want to be able to help some friends and neighbors with that. And I think there's some other folks in Texas looking to get sparkling wine equipment as well.
There are several out here that are doing the traditional sparkling, but they do ship it to California for final processing with a company out there, Rack and Riddle. We got the tour of the facilities, and they were very accommodating for us, giving us a tour and showing us the process. It was very overwhelming and impressive, their operation. And that's not what we necessarily want to be, but we do want to introduce it to the hill country out here in Texas so that smaller producers can get into that market and produce higher quality sparkling as opposed to just doing a pet nat.
And so I really despise pet nat. I know it was a thing for a time. Texas makes a lot of pet nats. Sorry, folks. I've tried a lot. They're just not my thing. I would rather have traditional method sparkling. And we are expanding our grape varietals that we're doing for that this year. So we will include Pinot Noir, provided it survives a hailstorm that's supposed to hit the region in the high plains tonight with baseball. No. So we're just hoping that it passes over the vineyard and fruit will be okay up there, but we'll expand that. We'll look to do some Chenin Blanc in the future and keep up with the Trebbiano. And then my dad has a hybrid grape in his vineyard, Blanc de Bois. It's usually picked at high acid anyway because of the characteristics of that varietal. So we will use that in sparkling wine as well.
So for those people who don't know the process of sparkling wine and making sparkling wine, can you just run us through quickly? What's the process with, like you were talking about traditional method? Give me the process for making a sparkling wine.
Sure. So if we were in Champagne, France, we of course could call this a champagne. We're not. So therefore it's called sparkling wine in the US. And we will pick those grapes usually between 17 and 19 bricks. So that's lower sugar than you would pick if you were making a white wine or a red wine. So pick it early to keep that high acid quality in there. Then we will ferment that just like you would for a still wine. Once that fermentation is complete, we let it rest for just a short period of time, kind of calm down from fermentation 1 before we jack it back up with fermentation number 2. So fermentation number 2, you're going to add sugar, yeast, some wine to get that going. You're going to measure your temperature. It needs to be kind of at a consistent pace to let that fermentation grow over the course of several days. I say it's like having a toddler. You can't leave it alone because it'll be fine, and then all of a sudden the bricks will drop. Well, when those
eats through the sugar,
it eats through the sugar like a kid on a candy high. But when that sugar drops to about 1 brick, you want to be able to bottle that wine. So in order, am I leaving something out here?
Just you take that starter and you feed it into the rest of the wine.
Into the rest of the still wine.
And then you have to keep it mixed because you also have some other what are called riddling agents that help collect the yeast to settle in the bottle. So you got to keep that mixed. And then while you're mixing it, you're filling it in bottles. And then you have, what's interesting is what we didn't realize is that there's a little plastic cork called a bidule that you need to have. And
nobody talks about it. Everybody has it.
It's this little secret that no one likes to talk about. It's a little plastic. Yeah, a little plastic cup that goes into the top, and the yeast will eventually settle into that. But
even when we were in Champagne, before we started this harvest, we said, hey, so, this Bidule thing is, everybody talks about it like underground. Is that really a thing? And every producer in Champagne was like, oh my God, you need to have it. So therefore I thought it was a gimmick. And I was like, why do I need something plastic in there? But apparently, yes, you do. Everybody has it.
You bottle it with all the yeast in it, and then you let it sit and you let it basically ferment and sparkle. And then over time, you check the pressure to see if it's building. And then at around between 6 and 8 bars, it should be done. Yeah. So that's good pressure. And then you let it rest and dissolve.
And then you'll disgorge it. So
you got to start the riddling process.
You got to start riddling. So riddling with a machine takes 7 days, much faster than hand turning those bottles, so that all the yeast comes down to the neck of the bottle of the wine. And once that happens, you're ready to disgorge it. So what that means is you'll put it in the machine, you'll pop off that crown cap that's been sitting on there with the Bidule. It flies off for about 90 miles an hour. With the ice plug, all this little yeast will come out. Then you'll top it off with a wine that is a still wine and with different sugar levels in there. Normal kind of a brut champagne would have 7 grams per liter. So that's very tiny amount that's almost imperceptible to the taste, but it's there.
So what's interesting with still wine, throughout the process, you have many different iterations to be able to adjust the flavor or blend it with some other things to get the flavor that you're looking for. With sparkling, those things you do before you really know what the final taste is until you get to that dosage, and that's your last attempt to go, okay, what's the cherry on top that you need to do to make it your best quality of sparkling. And so you're doing a lot of stuff just by, it's like, okay, we think when it gets carbonated that this will taste good. And so there is that little bit of kind of cross your fingers and hope the flavor profile is what you're expecting. So
the French will tell you have to use your imagination, and really you kind of do with that base wine. Okay, I imagine it will be something great at the end of the day.
It's it's interesting.
It sounds like quite a process.
Yes, that is an understatement.
Yeah.
And now, do you guys have the bodies to do all that? Meaning, like, do you have to have help, or can you do all that with everything else you're doing around?
So you can actually do it with 3 people. We are fortunate that we have a kid that loves sparkling wine too, so he can help us with that process and does. And then we can always get some help from friends and neighbors just to make that happen. My dad also still will help us with some of the processing things, like he's helping us this harvest with a few things. He'll come over for that batch because he'll just want to see the whole process anyway.
Yeah.
So we will be able to do it ourselves, and because we'll start that secondary fermentation after harvest is done this year. That gives you like the small little break, and then get started with.
And we'll start riddling and processing, doing the final processing of our initial sparkling. So it's something's always going on. Yes.
So.
Hey, that's okay. I mean, it sounds like a great thing. I'd love to see it, and I, it must be exciting. I mean, being big sparkling fans, just making your own. And I mean, it really is going to be your own sparkling. I mean, that you can't beat that.
No, you can't.
You can't. It definitely makes you appreciate the good sparkling when you do come across it, to go, when you know everything that went into it and the equipment. And even to think that before, people used to hand riddle with all the racks and just that little quarter turn or eighth of a turn and a little tilt every time. And thank God we have machines that do it now.
Yes.
Otherwise, it makes you wonder why people would even try.
But, we have to say thanks to the French for having sparkling wine, and thanks for the British for making those bottles that can keep sparkling wine. So both of those contributed to the process. And I'll say, even though it's a painful process sometimes, I think there were a lot of cursing at one point during our fermentation process for round 2. At the end of the day, we're crazy enough that we love it, and we're doing it again.
Yeah. So we actually had a funny story with this this batch of sparkling to where we had a kind of happy mistake, just like, champagne was discovered, where we were struggling with the second fermentation. We would test bottles and we weren't getting any pressure.
We did everything according to protocol. Everything was written down. And I said, I am tired of dealing with this wine. We had a vacation planned, and so he brought a bottle over.
I brought a bottle that I tried to test the pressure, and there was no pressure. It wasn't fermenting. And so I brought it just so we could kind of taste where it was at as well, just to see what the flavor was at. And we're like, well, we might have a dud batch, and that the yeast might have died. And so we were heading out of town, and we left the bottle on the counter.
In the tasting room. I said, I don't want to deal with this right now. I'll just deal with it when we get back.
So we came back after a week vacation. And Elisa calls me and sends me a little picture. There are bubbles in the bottle. We're like, it's fermenting. And so then we realized. I
tasted it and I was like, okay, any other bottle of wine left open for 7 days would taste horrible, like vinegar. This tasted amazing. And I could see the fermentation still going on. So super excited.
We started raising the temperature in our storage just to kind of see. And we would go a few degrees, give it a week, check it, a few more degrees. And then, okay, we found the right temperature. And we went from like, crap, we just wasted thousands of dollars to, hey, we got it to work. Now we're good to go. And
we went from 57 degrees to 62, and that made all the difference.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's awesome. Again, toddler, very temperamental.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So let me ask you, Elisa, so for you, it looks like, prior to doing this, you had a successful career in working for the government or whatnot. So did you retire and then you're doing your wine dream, or was it like, I'm quitting and I'm doing this thing now? So how did that all go?
Well, there was a process of very tempting to quit several times and start this. And then it ended up I could qualify for early retirement. So I did early retirement from the federal government and we started this. But I will say, because of COVID, we were actually able to start this earlier because we were working from home. We weren't commuting. So all of a sudden we found ourselves with all this extra time on our hands. We weren't driving an hour and a half in traffic. I could drive elsewhere, not deal with any traffic, and make wine. So I called up a friend of mine who has an incubator, which is how we started, and said, hey, remember how you said I could come make wine? I was like, how about now? How about this year? He said, well, what do you want to make? I said, how about Chris thought I was making 1 ton of red.
The thought was, let's just do a ton and see how it goes. Mm-hmm. We ended up ordering 9 tons.
So we did 9 as our first batch. So
that was dipping our toe in, was 9 tons of fruit.
Amazing.
But,
so then you just retired early, and then it was time to start the winery.
Yes. So we were featuring our wines at a industry event at Garrison Brothers the week I retired. So I actually was here. I had fruit come in one day from a vineyard out about an hour east of El Paso. And I was like, okay, well, if someone could give me all the chemistry, I'll tell you what I need done in that. And I've got to fly back to DC. So I did the industry event, handled my fruit issue, flew back to DC, signed out my retirement paperwork, flew back here, finished the process on that batch of Cabernet to get that ready to ferment and go in barrel. And yeah, so never took a day off and just kept doing this.
Wow.
I'm just along for the ride.
Yeah.
White knuckling it the whole way.
So I definitely want to ask you some specifics about your winery and all that in a second, but can you just give everybody, what is the, current state of wine in Texas? And the reason I'm saying that is because just the more I learn about it, it seems that things are going really well and lots of awards are being won, including some of your wines, which we'll talk about in a second. But just kind of give us an overview of what's going on. And I know Texas is a huge state, but what's going on with the wine, the wine country there in Texas?
So I think the Texas wine industry is a growing industry. For folks in California, the long wine road is Highway 29, Napa to Sonoma kind of area. For us here, it's Highway 290. And that is the second longest continuous wine region in the United States, right after Napa to Sonoma. So we are Yeah.
So that's
between Johnson City and
Johnson City and Fredericksburg. So the home of President Johnson all the way to Fredericksburg. So.
Okay.
And so for people wondering where that is, if you are leaving the Austin airport and you drive for about an hour, you'll be right in the wine country. So very similar to folks coming out of San Francisco, going north, or coming down from Sacramento. For us in Texas, we're the size of France. It's a big state. We can grow all kinds of things here, which makes it very exciting. When I looked to make wine in California, I said, well, I love California Cabernet. I love to drink it, but I don't want to be pigeonholed into you can only make California, Cabernet and Chardonnay. So I like the fact in Texas, if you can grow it, you can make it. So there is no one grape for Texas because we're such a large state. So like I said, we have Pinot Noir coming in. People are like, Pinot Noir from Texas? Like, is that a thing? Yes, actually it is. The High Plains has an elevation higher than that of Howell Mountain and Napa Valley. So you can have that elevation. You just don't realize you're there because it is flat. It looks like Mars. I think Chris was horrified that, like, oh my God, I can never live here when I took him up there. But I think, Texas wine industry has come a long way. When they first started, folks were still getting some grapes from California. There were some grown here in Texas. Now there's really a concentration on Texas grown, Texas made. We are going to do things here. I've read some stuff where people are like, oh, those Texas wines, they just over oak everything. And no, we don't. I mean, just like California, it's a stylistic choice by the winemaker, whether they want to do that or not do that. And we have folks from France here. We have folks from California moving in, all that want to make Texas wine with Texas grapes. And there's really just improvement in the quality that is coming out. We're getting away from kind of that cowboying it mentality where, okay, well, that's fine. I can just fix that and make that happen. People are really looking to concentrate on quality. When we started making our wines, I said, I'm filtering every one of my reds. And some people in Texas were absolutely horrified. Like, why would you want to filter your wines? I said, have you seen this overpriced water bottle that I have from time to time? That is highly filtered water. I like filtered items. I'm going to filter all my wines because that's what I like to drink. I'm not a huge fan of natural wine. I think, I'm sure there's a place for that for some people that like to do that, but they've been trying to find and filter wine for centuries when they go back through artifacts overall. So I don't think Texas is far off by doing some of that filtration and then planting and seeing what grows here. One of our neighbors has a fantastic Claret Blanche. Not really going to find that a lot of places in the United States, and he makes a really great wine out of it. We wanted to focus on Malbec and Merlot because those are some of our favorite reds, but we've also done some Sangiovese, Cabernet, Aligonico that we really enjoy. We've messed around with just a few grapes, so I have some friends that said, hey, if it looks like such a great harvest this year, I might have a ton left over of this, that. Do you want it? And I said, sure, let's see what happens, let's try and make that.
Yeah, it's very cooperative out here. And a lot of people are saying that we're probably about where Napa was in the late 60s and where, you're seeing an influx of money and influx of influence from people from outside the state, whether it be California or even from France, like Elisa was saying. And you're seeing good investment, in the area. And so it's kind of nice to see it growing. We're excited about the sparkling with our investment that's going in, and that we're going to share that with our friends and neighbors, and to see if that can encourage some more, good quality sparkling too. So.
And it's when I tell people and they say, "Well, I haven't had a good Texas wine," I'm like, "Where did you buy that wine?" Well, I bought it at the grocery store, or I bought it, at some, I don't know, random place that had one varietal of Texas wine. I said, well, I would tell that to the same people that are in France that say, oh, I tried a California wine, and it was awful, and it was, some grocery store varietal. No, of course you're not going to get quality. So we do ship to a number of states. and right now direct to consumer, but we're branching out into some wine bars here in the state in Texas. And once we kind of get a good network there, we'll look to branch out further. So I think the state of the wine industry is focusing on increased improvement in quality, increased improvement on looking at what does really grow and function here. And then finally on reaching that kind of outward network on where we can go to expand to not only within the state, but then to grow outside that state for expansion to consumers.
So I was going to ask you, what are a couple of grapes that maybe that we don't grow necessarily out here in California that do really well in Texas?
Aligonico, definitely. That's one that most people would probably think does well on the high plains. It does grow there, but for me, flavor profile wise, I love Hill Country Aligonico. It's absolutely outstanding and amazing. And we hope to get some more of that fruit this year from another winery down the street from us. But I think that's one that grows Claret Blanche, which I mentioned. I'm trying to think, we just have so many Italian and Spanish varietals. Like sometimes you'll hear something and like, oh, I didn't know somebody was growing that here. And it's just an opportunity to try more things. Mourvedre does grow in California too, but that's really taken off here in Texas. Tannat as well. I know that's grown kind of central coast of California. I mean, Tables Creek, thank you for bringing that to the United States. I know that was kind of an accident by their folks that loaded it on the boat, but we're glad those vines arrived here. And I think people would find it kind of interesting. We're actually looking to plant some Chardonnay on our property for our sparkling program. And somebody said, oh, it doesn't get cool enough. I said, have you looked at the weather in California lately? It's not super cool there, but Clone 5 is doing some great things, the Winty clone. So kind of taking some lessons learned from you folks in California too for what we're doing here. Chenin Blanc, I know, is also grown in California, but there's quite a bit of that grown out here too.
Well, back to the Chardonnay, I know one of our neighbors, didn't they just get a double gold?
Yep, they got a double gold
at
for
San Francisco.
A Chardonnay that was planted over 20 years ago in the Hill Country. So you know, you never know what you're going to find, kind of unearthing some things here and there. I mean, in the Hill Country itself, we have, so our property has soil very much like San Emilion, where it's clay with little limestone pieces mixed in. Our neighbors, a mile down the road, Sandy Road Vineyards, their property is red clay. And then they have a small strip of granite running through the back of their property. Going kind of south of us, there's all limestone. So we have all of these different like terroirs all in one small little area. So it's really kind of fun to see what grows. Albarino is another big one that grows well and does really well in the soils out here. We've had some fantastic ones.
What's interesting with Texas, when you start looking at the size, I mean, so for us right now, we're getting our fruit basically from far west Texas with the high plains where we get a predominant amount of our fruit, the Hill Country where we are basically north of San Antonio, west of Austin, but then our family vineyard is basically would be considered East Texas or near the Gulf Coast, and so which is another 3 hours away. So I mean, our grapes, if you from one extreme to the other, is about an 8 to 9 hour drive, and so so when you look at just the different elevations, different climates, different soils, I mean, you're hitting it all. And so there's, you know, it's interesting to say, it's like, oh, we're still trying to figure out what grows here. It's because just about everything can. As long as you find the right place for it. So it's,
and I mean, out here in Texas, we have vineyards in the high plains that are 1,200 acres. And then like an 800-acre vineyard, and it's like, oh, well, they lost, you know, a third of their crop due to hail, and somebody's like, oh, okay, well, I'll just go get it from down the road over here because they still have some fruit available this year. So, I mean, all these big, beautiful Poulenc machine harvests, and I've seen, we've had the fruit come in from that, and they've come a long way in their equipment, and it comes in beautiful and perfect, and it's auto sorted. on an optical sorter on board. So comes in all destemmed and ready to rock and roll. So it's pretty exciting.
Wow. So the next thing I want to talk about is for anybody who's like me, who's like a big wine fan, and I guess, a fanatic with wine, is just starting a winery seems like the coolest endeavor ever. But I'm sure there's so many things that, we don't think about when we think about, okay, starting a winery. So I have a couple of questions about starting a winery. So the very first step of starting your winery is what? Like, what's the first thing you do?
So I'll answer that one. Have a friend that already has one.
Okay.
So, but seriously, especially if you're a wine fan, and I'm sure there are wineries that you're going to, basically talking to them to say, hey, I'm thinking about buying a few tons of fruit. Can I work with you to make that for me? There's a process called custom crush where you're basically hiring a winery to make the wine for you. But some wineries, depending on how well the winemaker or the owner, you could be more hands-on, and it also depends on your level of knowledge and expertise. For us, we were hands-on. Yeah, we're very hands-on. We both had we did the winemaking certification from Texas Tech, so I would recommend anybody that wants to do winery either do Texas Tech's program or UC Davis's. Both are really great programs out there. And maybe work a harvest and see if you really want to do this, because if you want to have a winery, you have to be willing to do everything in that winery. Labor is scarce. Yeah, the more time you can spend in the cellar, even just helping out, driving a forklift, hooking up pumps and stuff, really kind of helps out. But for us, it worked out great being at an incubator, to where we're helping with our own fruit and we're helping with other people's fruit, helping them with their wines. And so you're always doing something. Make a wine that I just don't care for that particular grape. And it was still a lot of fun to say, hey, I'm never going to make this, but I'll happily make it for somebody else. It just gives you more experience doing the calculations on getting a yeast culture started and doing additives and stuff like that. So, and to be honest, just to know good workflow of where your barrels are, where your tanks are, getting from tank to barrel, and then back from barrel into tank when you're getting ready to filter. And I mean, we toured wineries, not just in Texas, but elsewhere, just to ask the winemakers questions. Like one, we said, hey, your barrels seem really far from your tank room. He said, oh yeah, it takes like 8 minutes on a forklift to drive from point A to point B. Wow. And now we have to hook those up to bottles. So it does make a long trip. Another winery was very beautifully designed. They were scared to hit it with a forklift. So instead of increasing their space, they decreased their space. Yeah, so because they were afraid to get too close to the wall. Yeah. So now that room got smaller, which makes it even harder to circulate around. So, and any winemaker will tell you more space is always better. Yeah. Because build as big as you can afford.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, so as far as getting started, talking to other wineries and asking their advice, to even if you just want to do a ton or two, and then seeing if there is even a co-op out there to where you can be a lot more hands-on and just kind of volunteer your time in there, moving things around. Just you learn a lot. And so sometimes you learn what not to do, but that's okay too.
Yeah.
So
how long is that process? Planning before you start?
Oh, so for us, it would have been let's see, March, April. I think we decided in April of 2020. And that was probably a little late because harvest. You need about a year to source your fruit so you can identify it. What was nice with the co-op we were with, they're sourcing so much fruit for so many other people that it was easier for them to, go from 10 tons to 11 tons, right? And so there is that ability to, the purchasing power is a little better to be able to get some small lots, which can be hard sometimes. But let's see, for us, it was April, it was a little late. Fruit came in September. And
August and September started fermenting things.
And then we were open to sell in August of 22. So we did basically the 20 harvest. And 2
we
years
let
later,
our reds age 18 months in barrel and then kind of bottled, and we're ready to go with those. I will say, yes, you have to kind of backwards plan. When do you want that wine released? Because that way you know what needs to be done. And then I have a running list. So our production facility will be open for this year's harvest. So they're finishing up some of the final details on that now. So if you're building a production facility, design and redesign, I think. So Chris is a designer in his real job outside of the winery, but how many times did we redesign that?
So, well,
what iteration are we on?
I told our contractor that I was done with the design, I think we're on version 8 or 9 since that one. Wow. And it has grown from basically it was supposed, so just to give you a clue, we were supposed to be building a tractor barn, and it is now.
Because we said we need a place to store some glass before
and to start prepping our soils so that we can plant, do some clearing. And from that basically small tractor barn, it's turned into a 4,000 square foot building, and to be able to handle a 5,000 case sparkling program.
5 to 10,000, we can increase up to 10. So
in addition to our still program, which is another probably 15 to 2,000 case. And so as you can imagine, starting with maybe 1,000 square feet, blowing up to 4,000 square feet, and the fact that if we keep going, we may not even be able to move a tractor into our building before it becomes more either cold storage or more wine production. So it's been interesting. But I mean, to give you a sense of our timeline, we started making wine in 2020. We found property in March of 22. And
so we have 43 acres in the hill country.
Yeah, and then we closed on it in April, and we had a temporary tasting room, and we were open for sale the first weekend of August. Wow. And so that allowed us to start recouping, and then broke ground on our production building, our what was supposed to be our tractor barn
in October,
and we'll be moving in. We're starting to move in equipment now, but right now they're still putting in electrical and some of the plumbing, and we should be ready to install equipment at the end of June here, at the end of this month. And so we'll be ready for harvest that kind of second week of July. It'll be tight, but yeah, so.
Well, that's got to be super exciting, just being able to pick out what you want, exactly what you want, the tanks you want, everything that you want. I mean, that's a pretty cool thing.
It is. And I mean, it's nice to be able to do that from scratch versus perhaps inherit a problem. If you create your own problems, you're like, well, I only have myself to blame for this mess, but didn't inherit any problems. We're excited. Our tanks are actually coming from California. So the first of those arrive in 2 weeks, and the second batch arrive a few weeks later. So we kind of knew what we wanted research wise. I would say, for folks wanting to start a winery, go to Unified, make sure to visit with all the different manufacturers, and then make sure to understand, ask them for a list of who has that equipment that you want to purchase, so that you can then go ask the people, okay, what is your honest opinion? What are the good and bad of having that certain piece of equipment or from that manufacturer? And what kind of support do you get if there's a problem?
So this will be the first harvest in your own place.
Yes.
Yeah.
It'll be nice, because we've been driving about an hour and a half away from where we're living. So now we only have a 40-minute drive. So that makes it much easier.
Oh, that's great. All right, so let's go back to the winery, starting the winery. So obviously the name is obvious. So it's Elisa Christopher Wines. It comes from your name. So
Yes.
how do you come up with that? Meaning, I'm sure there was 1,000 names that you went through just to get to this name. So how did you come up with it?
Chris wanted.
I came up with 1,000 names, and Elisa shot all of them down.
Okay.
And so the placeholder was Elisa Christopher, and everyone started liking it. And so so in my background, I've actually kind of helped clients of mine actually name master plan communities and have gone through that process. And so kind of been used to that. We even looked at hiring a consultant to help us out and, to help with the story. And what was hard for us is that at the time we didn't have the property to really kind of help with that story. But what we did have was Elisa's family and our story. And so we really started focusing more on that. And for us, it was this kind of family adventure with her dad, kind of getting it when he was in high school, teaching Elisa about it. And basically as a hobby, started making wine and getting Lisa to fall in love with it, that it was all about kind of our family and our family connections. And then
because before Chris and I got married, I told him, I said, you have to be willing to move to Texas, get a dog, and have a winery. And he was like, okay, that's it. So he signed up for all of it.
Yes.
He only got freaked out during the movie Decanted when they realized, I believe it was Bell Winery. He said he'd only done it 40 something.
So he's been making wine for over 40 years. I'm like, oh, okay. So, but he says, I've only attempted this 40 times. And that was the only time I really kind of started to panic. Like, wait a minute, we're starting late in our life. Yeah. We're not going to get 40 tries at this. So we'll see. I don't know. This is taking the years off of me.
It is one of those things. I worked at a winery, and I remember the director of winemaking saying the same thing. I've only done this 45 times.
Yeah.
But you think about it, 45 years, that's a long time, but yes. It's only 45 times. I mean, it's crazy to think of it that way, but yeah, I remember him saying the same thing, and it kind of resonated with me a little bit. Like, you've only done it 45 times, but you've been doing it for 45 years. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah. So that really resonated with me, or kind of scared me a little bit, but yeah, so we really wanted to focus on just kind of our family. And so the name was kind of there, and everyone kind of liked the way it kind of flows. And so we're like, okay, well, if we're doing this, we're talking about family as kind of our brand, then what should our logo be? What should our brand be? And one of the things that I kind of fell in love with the property that her family has is there's a 800-year-old oak tree on the property where her dad is growing his Blanc de Bois. And I love this tree. It's massive. The branches grow back down to the ground. They touch the ground and then come back up. And it just reminds me of the old family trees that you would find where people would map out their heritage and everything. And her dad is in the genealogy. And so we started going back to this giant heritage oak tree on the property. And Elisa's family tree. You can't
have like a tree. Everybody has a tree. So we worked with the designer to come up with something better.
Right. And so we started talking to the designer about the things that interest us, and that, we really like this kind of massive oak tree, but Elisa's heavily influenced by France. I love kind of the more Art Deco style of design. And so we kind of fed these to our graphic artists and came up with our logo. And what was great about it is the base of our logo is reminiscent of the Eiffel Tower, but represents the roots of the oak tree. And then we have this oak tree with the branches dipping down to the ground from the family, kind of that 800-year-old heritage oak. And it really kind of blended the influences that have changed Elisa's life, and then just kind of that tree that's icon for the family on that property. So,
wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it was quite a journey. It took a lot of misses before we got the hit. So
yeah. So you guys live, you just mentioned it earlier, so I was going to ask you about this, but so you guys live on 43 acres in Texas right now, or you bought 35 acres, is that right?
So we bought 43 acres where we have our winery, and then we actually live in the town of Dripping Springs, which is about a 40-minute drive from the property.
It's a suburb of
not
Austin.
too far. It's a suburb of Austin anymore.
So you won't believe this, but my older brother lives in Dripping Springs, Texas.
Oh my goodness.
Well, he will have to come out.
Yes.
Yeah. But anyway, so you have this property, and right now it's not planted to grapes, right?
No, it was full of a lot of cedar, which is really something I'm highly allergic to. Most people are when they move to Texas. Finally, it's going to hit you one time or other.
It's hard on the soils.
Cedar
It really
sucks up all the nitrogen.
Yeah.
So we have cleared a large portion of that cedar. We've cleared about 15 acres so far. And then we'll plant in 2025. So we're rehabbing the soil, planting some native grasses back into that to give it nitrogen. Ironically, bluebonnets, the state flower of Texas, are great at providing nitrogen as well. So we planted some this year. We'll throw out some more seeds for next year. So it'll be aesthetically pleasing and also rehab that soil.
Wow. So that was my next question is, what goes into prepping the land to be able to plant, and how long is that process?
So what's interesting, we got to basically get the plots kind of surveyed so they can put in the end post and the cordon wires, but then it's ordering basically the vines and then picking rootstock. You actually can match the rootstock for your climate, soil.
So for us, that'll be SO4 rootstock.
For the nerds out there that
know what that means, yes. But that works really great for our soils that we have. And prepping them is really just letting those native grasses and plants do their thing. And then we will be able to kind of chill that up. We will plant grapevines already grafted onto rootstock so that they'll be healthy, ready to go. And then it'll be about 3 years till we have some fruit on those. And then kind of looking at year 4 for harvesting those grapes.
Yeah, that was my next question. How long before you'll be able to get some fruit? So.
It's a long process. You just have to be patient.
All right. So how do you decide what you're going to plant on your property? Is it based on what will grow well where you're at? Or it sounds like based on what you were saying earlier, so many things grow so well, you can kind of experiment with certain varieties. Is that right?
So in our case, it was a combination of things. It's a combination of what grows well on our soil and also what is hard to get. Mm-hmm. So Merlot, I love Merlot. It's a great grape varietal. If you look at it anywhere in the world, it's like, oh, okay, you want me to grow here? That's fine, I'll grow here. And it'll grow in the most like bizarre climates, hot weather, cooler weather. It's a happy grape wherever it's planted almost. So we will plant Merlot. It's also great for blending with things. Mm-hmm. It's great by itself. Love it. And then we will plant the Chardonnay. And that's from the factor of that is one that is harder to get. And we would like to include that in our sparkling wine program. So we'll start with those two varietals. We plan to plant up to 12 acres, I think. And then we could go further than that, but I know 12 we can manage.
Yeah, so 12 is about the limit for a small family to basically manage. But I have it kind of planned out that we can go up to about 15, 16 acres planted if we ever grow to that point. But yeah, as far as the varietals, a lot of it is just, what makes it hard to get. We'll always supplement with high plains fruit. And what other people are growing because it is more conducive for them to grow it than ourselves.
There's a vineyard manager for another vineyard in the Hill Country, and he comes by our winery all the time because he likes our wines, which I'm really grateful. But he keeps telling me, plant Terraldigo, plant Terraldigo. I'm like, I don't know. I need to try more Terraldigo before I can make that happen. He's like, look at your soil out here. It's great. So
yeah, we're getting a lot of free advice on what will grow. But yeah, it's really to kind of guarantee kind of what our estate primary varietals will be, wines, making sure we have that, and then supplementing with the other stuff. And so for us, it is going to be a little harder because, the Chardonnay is going to be probably a lot more temperamental for us and definitely be a little more labor intensive, but we also know that will guarantee that sparkling program to be more successful until more of the Chardonnay becomes more available. So
let me ask you this. What is the most expensive ton of grapes to buy in Texas? And how much is a ton of grapes?
So I would say it depends. It depends on the grower and depends on where that comes from. This last year, our most expensive grapes will be cheap by California prices. It was a Sangiovese, and they were $3,000 a ton. Most of our grape varietals run between $2,500 and $2,900 a ton.
And then some of the whites you can get around 18, just under 2,000 a ton. Mm-hmm. But it just we're seeing those prices. Unfortunately, everything's becoming more expensive. So I would say our first whites, I thought we got those for around 18 a ton, but now it's probably closer to 20 to 22 now. So,
but 3,000 doesn't seem cheap.
No, it's not. I mean, I've seen the California Cabernet prices, so I know for people out there, they're like, "Oh God, I wish I could pay 3,000."
When you're small upstart, though, it's
when you're small and you're starting, it is expensive. And I definitely looked at that. I made Sangiovese last year simply because we had our vineyard that had Merlot in it got wiped out due to high winds during bloom. So all those beautiful, delicate flowers blew away in the breeze, literally blew out in the wind. So that was not available, so I needed to find some other fruit. They said, "Well, we can get you some Sangiovese. There's a couple of folks that have that." And I said, "Okay, I'll take it."
So the big thing in Texas is to be adaptable is one thing. I don't know what it was like in California, but for us, I always tell people, let's say you order 3 tons of Malbec. You might get 1, you might get 6, or it might be Aligonico. You just don't know, and you need to be able to pivot when that harvest comes in, because you're not sure really what the yield ended up being, and just those things, and being able to pivot. And I would say that was what was also nice about the incubators, because let's say a total of 10 tons of Merlot was ordered, but maybe 15 came. Well, now it's like, okay, we can divvy out a ton here and a ton there, and it's not a huge deal to take on an extra ton. Everyone says when there's extra fruit, take it, because you don't know when you're going to have a lean year.
Yeah.
You want to have that inventory. And so it's a little easier when, let's say 6 of us split up 4 extra tons versus us now being on our more independent. All of a sudden we have to absorb maybe 3 tons. It's like, that affects our budget. That's the glass we were going to order to bottle what we really wanted. So it is a challenge. And that's, I think, part of the growing pains right now in Texas is there's still that a little bit of it is just good crop estimations. And the other part of it is when you go through Texas, the weather, like I said, so Elisa called me when I was on my way back home. It's like, oh, the storm chasers are out in West Texas in the high plains because there's supposed to be one hell of a storm. And we're like, great. So who knows what vineyard's going to get hit, what block is going to get hit, and therefore you just, say a little prayer, cross your fingers, and hope that things get somewhat distributed evenly, and that it's not just one person taking the hit. So,
wow. You guys got a pretty good attitude about that, actually. I mean, I could.
Oh no, there's
you
definitely
have to. You must have to. I
guess.
There's some swearing and cussing when that happens, but you get it out of your system and you adapt.
So let's talk about some of your wines, okay? Yeah. So congratulations, first of all. You guys had some wines. I guess, were in the San Francisco Chronicle tasting for 2022, and you guys got some medals, which is really awesome. So just tell me and the listeners, what is the process for submitting wines to, say, San Francisco Chronicle competition? How do you know how your wines did? I mean, did somebody email you or something and then they let you know? And just how that all goes.
Sure. So San Francisco Chronicle, we were very excited to win awards basically in our first vintages of reds and our first vintage of whites. So won awards on the Malbec, which I'm drinking now, and on our Vermentino. And that's a white that's absolutely crisp, acidity, and delicious. But what we do is I knew about the competition for a while. So we were kind of looking for the submission dates. When we saw those pop up, we sent in the requirement is to send in 4 bottles of your wine. So we sent in 4 bottles of, we didn't even send everything in. We sent in just 2, and don't ask me why, other than I was like, oh my gosh, all these other things are going on. These are my 2 favorites. Let's send them in. And my Merlot has really come back around since then. So now I wish, we would have done some other things, but we sent those 2 in. We were notified, we sent them in before Christmas. We were notified, I know it was after Christmas, maybe February?
Yeah.
Late, somewhere mid-January to February timeframe, they send you an email saying, hey, congratulations. You won these awards.
They send you the artwork so you can post on all your social media and stuff like that.
So, yeah. And then we find out, then it gets published, of course, in the Chronicle, and then a number of other folks that write about wine will repost those. So at the end of the day, for us, it's good marketing so that we can have those. And it's always nice to hear, what does somebody else think about your wine? I mean, opinions are simply opinions. Everybody has one, good, bad, whatever. But it's kind of nice to know where you fall.
Yeah, I was going to think of the same thing. It's nice to know what other people think, but I was going to ask you, as a newer winery, how does that impact business, if it impacts it at all?
So I think if you have a winery, the hardest thing to do is to sell wine.
Yeah.
It is not hard to make wine. I mean, sometimes, as much as I said, sparkling wine was a challenge. The hardest thing still is selling wine. So, when people come to a winery for the first time and they say, oh, well, I came because I saw you won some awards on the wine, because does somebody want to drink a wine that they know nothing about, that hasn't won anything, or do they want to drink a wine that won awards? Why do people pay attention to Robert Parker scores, good, bad, or indifferent?
Yep.
It's a system somebody can relate to or say, well, that wine got reviewed. I mean, Robert Parker never puts out any score that's 75 or 60. That doesn't exist.
I mean, especially now, when you think about how people shop online, let's say on Amazon, you got 3 products that are all identical. If one's got 100 reviews and it's a 4.8, and the other 2 don't have any reviews, you're going to go, well, I know most people like this one. You're going to go for that. So it does help. And what's interesting is that we're seeing, especially now with Texas growing, more and more wines being submitted for some of the bigger competitions and taking in awards. And what's nice is it's starting to give Texas more recognition that it's not just a bunch of cowboys out there who one day decided to grow grapes instead of cotton and to make wine out of it. So you take a lot out of winning an award, but you also can't put all your faith in it either, because parts of it are subjective, but it does help at least establish almost that baseline of you are producing something that is good and worthy of selling to a customer. And so especially getting started, because you just don't know. You think it's good.
Yeah.
But
so what were your expectations when you send these wines in? Did you have expectations like, I think we're going to do really well, or I'm kind of scared, I don't know what's going to happen? Like, did you have any expectations?
I really didn't. I was like, well, this is a crapshoot. It could go really good or it could go really bad.
For that one, it was kind of a last minute decision.
Was San Francisco International was a last minute decision.
It was a last minute decision where we're like, hey, this is coming up. Actually, we almost missed the deadline. I was like, let's give it a shot and see what happens. And
the Chronicle, I was paying a lot of attention to, and I said, well, let's put forth some effort, and I was a little scared to send in like everything that we make. I said, let's just try small, try with some of our favorites and go from there. And I'm actually quite pleased with the awards we won. No, it's not platinum, double gold, what have you, but the best Olympic athletes are not those that get the gold medal on the first try. So they're always something to strive for and achieve for. And that's really what we want to do with our wines, is to continue to perfect what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about a couple of these wines specifically. So the Vermentino you mentioned already. So let's talk about that. Tell me about the Vermentino, what your process is for making that, and maybe some tasting notes for that Vermentino.
Sure. So the Vermentino is from a vineyard called Canted County Vineyards. It's not a real county. It's just the name of their vineyards. It's from the thriving metropolis of La Mesa, Texas, which nobody even in Texas sometimes knows where that is. It's about, driving from Austin, it takes us about 5 hours to get there, northwest, or it's about an hour southwest of Lubbock. And the guys there have 800 acres planted. I like Vermentino. I think it's a fantastic grape. So when we were looking at a white wine to make, that's what we selected, and came out of their vineyard. In fact, we should get some of that this year as well. And the guys up there are just really, they're really awesome people. We love working with them. We've already been up to the vineyard a couple times this year, so we'll go back again in a few weeks. But anyway, so we harvested that. It was machine harvested. We processed it in stainless steel for our fermentation to keep that kind of crisp acidity going on with that wine. Let's see, tasting notes on it. It has notes of green apple, and then a little bit of lime zest at the end of the palate. So it's a wine that is grown in Italy originally. In France is known as Roll, and it's used mostly as a blending grape in France. The Italians make it a single varietal, so we've chosen to make that as single varietal, but we may look to blend some of that this year with a few other varietals that we have going on. So kind of do some multi things.
What goes good with the Vermentino?
Oh, Vermentino, I think I love grilled halibut. It's one of my favorite things. So I think halibut, shrimp, it goes well with that. So if you want to do some grilled shrimp. So, and it goes well just also just sitting on your porch on a very hot night and having a glass of wine.
Hot, humid day in Texas, it can be quite refreshing, especially with that kind of crisp acidity.
So you guys also made a Cinsault Rosé.
We did. So the Cinsault Rosé is from La Pradera Vineyards, also in the Texas High Plains, and that is not as far from Lubbock. I want to say it's about 30 minutes from Lubbock. And it is a 100-acre vineyard. 8 of those are planted with Cinsault. And that Cinsault, we left on the skins a little bit longer. So in appearance, if you look at it online or if you come to the tasting room, it has
it's a more brilliant pink.
More brilliant pink.
It's a little darker.
Yes, it's a little darker. So we left that on the skins for about 6 hours extra, not to make it into an orange wine, but I wanted to have a wine that wouldn't just be your porch pounder, but one that would really pair well with food. Rosé is amazing. I love it. It is a great wine when you don't know what the food goes with. So for us, I would say that wine has notes of strawberry, a little bit of mango, and then some citrus on the end of the palate. And then it really paired well for us with Thanksgiving. We use that because my large extended family does a fried turkey, a smoked turkey, and a ham. So there's something for everybody, and that wine paired with every single course. I also think it really pairs well with grilled artichokes, but I'm one of the only people in Texas that likes grilled artichokes. My husband would probably say, no, thank you.
What's interesting for us is because of when we were opening, basically late in the season, and, typically we would normally release a rosé kind of more in the spring, start of the summer for that kind of refreshing, bright. But for us, because we were opening late, it really worked out to focus it more as a food pairing wine to get you through. Since we were opening in August, it got you really through Thanksgiving and Christmas. And we had a lot of club members and friends just say, man, it was great with Thanksgiving dinner or, it went well with from turkey to a prime rib. It really did. So.
And I mean, in Texas, we can drink rosé year round for the most part. So that's always a big seller for me anyways, is what can you have all the time here? And that's one of them.
So the next wine is this 2020 Malbec, and that's what I have, and that's what you guys are having. So we're all having the same one. Yes, that's the same one. So talk about that one a little bit. I'm really enjoying it. So give me some information, what you do to make this, and some tasting notes too for this.
Sure. So this Malbec came from Leahy Vineyards near Brownfield, Texas. So they are about 40 minutes from Lubbock as well. They have about 1,000 acres planted. This Malbec, when it came in, we loved the quality of the fruit, loved everything about it. We didn't want to change a whole lot in that wine. Used a fairly neutral yeast in it to preserve that fresh fruit qualities. So to me, you get a lot of kind of more jammy fruits, dried plum, dried blackberry, and then at the end of the palate, which Chris will tell you makes it a Texas wine, you get a little bit of the burnt ends of barbecue.
Yeah, to me, there's that little bit of spice and almost like a black pepper, like a reminiscent kind of taste. And to me, it reminds me of the burnt tips on a good brisket. And what's nice, I mean, that's just perfect in Texas. It seems like every time I mention brisket with the wine, we end up selling a bottle or two, because it just reminds you of a really good, just smoked meat. And it just, there are times when I drink, I wish I had some steak to just even dip in it, just to soak up some more of it, just to take it in. But it's very addicting. It's my favorite. I was told never to have a favorite, but it's a favorite. I have no problems telling customers, no, this is my favorite, and why. So
neutral oak barrels on it too, just to keep that fruit. And so it's been 18 months in neutral oak, just to allow that little bit of oxygen transfer to the wine to help develop its characteristics.
So let me ask you this. Some of my favorite wines are Malbecs from California. So what's the difference between a California and one that's, is there a big difference, or is there not a big difference?
Sure. So I would say there is even a difference in Texas because of where that Malbec was grown. I will tell you our 2021 Malbec that we haven't released yet, but it's sitting in bottle. That came from a different vineyard, has a lot more smoky qualities to it, little leathery tobacco than that more jammy fruit quality. So, and the difference in the vineyard was 20 minutes. That's it. And so, just that small difference can matter. So I would say, it just depends on the terroir. Ours is pretty violet colored. I've had more violet colored Malbecs from Argentina that were like super almost purple looking in the glass. So I would just say, as long as you like Malbec, try them all.
Yeah, no, I'm liking this one, so I appreciate it. All right, so let's talk about a couple more here. So there was one on the website that I thought was really interesting. It's called the 2021 Patriarch, and it's a Merlot and a Malbec blend. So talk about that. How did you come up with that? And talk about that one.
So I named that wine after my dad, being that he was in Northern California. He likes big, bold wines. So we blended 50% Merlot, 50% Malbec from our 2021 harvest. That spent then 75% new French oak for 18 months. So it really developed that wine. It is big, it is bold. Anybody that kind of loves big Napa Cabernets and you're like, no, I don't like Texas wine. I only drink Napa Cabernets. I'm like, well, here, try this one, see what you think. So I named it the Patriarch after my dad, who kept my interest in wine. And definitely we have a lot of folks from the Dallas area that love that wine, and we've sold quite a lot of it. So
you guys really still have any of that?
We do. We still have some of that.
Now tell me, people don't really come to your winery and say, I only drink Napa Cabs, do they?
We've had a couple people that they were brought there by their friends, but they only drink Napa cabs. And I said, well, go to Napa. I'm fine with that,
They at least say that's their preference. That's their flavor profile. They like the heavy Napa cab. And so we say, okay, well, if that's your kind of taste or flavor profile, then, this is what we've got for you. And then we also
But that also helps me kind of relate to what they're going to enjoy drinking and what they're not going to enjoy drinking. I mean, I did the same with, we had a guest from England. I spent 5 years living in England in my 20s, drank a lot of British wines, understand how British people like their wine. He loved that Aligonico, but I pointed him that direction because I knew that would be something that he would prefer for his palate, a wine that probably is better with a little bit of food, a little more earthy, and that will age for a significant period of time.
All right, so one more wine, the Aligonico, which you mentioned. So talk about that one. The very first Texas wine I ever had was an Aligonico, and I was very impressed. So I had never had it before. That was the first time I've ever had it, and so I was really impressed with that. So talk about the Aligonico.
Sure. So that Aligonico came from not far from Austin, actually, a little area called Burnet, Texas. It's from a vineyard that is now called Uplift Vineyard. It's going to be part of a new AVA that's been approved, but is still working through the rest of the paperwork, called, ironically, the Uplift AVA. So that vineyard has a significant amount of Italian varietals planted in there. I'm trying to think of what else they have planted, but that Aligonico, when it came in, actually had some oak chips in it. That's not necessarily the way I requested it, but when they were dividing up the fruit between other vineyards that the folks were delivering to, it all ended up with oak chips in it. And I thought, oh gosh, this is such a big wine. I'm not sure how that's going to turn out. I mean, it's already in the wine. It's been sitting in the grapes for a little while, so I'm not really going to be able to pull them all out until you go to press. So we said, okay, well, we'll roll with it and see what happens. I did blend just about 10% of Merlot back into that wine just to soften it a little bit, because most folks only age the wine in the back seat of their car. So that helps it make it a little more approachable. I love Aligonico. It's big and it's bold and really has a lot of rich dark fruits to it. And then you get almost like a hint of fennel kind of towards the end of the palate to bring in some of that earthiness, fennel or mushroom. It's earthy but fruity at the same time.
What was your description to a friend of the family? It was like, if you like Starbucks coffee, it's kind of the Starbucks coffee of wine almost.
Yeah, because it's just not a normal flavor, right? Starbucks coffee is like burnt just to give it a different flavor. And this kind of helps. Aligonico is just a wine that's going to have a different flavor to it. It's not going to be like a Malbec or a Cabernet. It's just going to be, wow, what am I drinking here? This is kind of fun when you revisit it.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you guys have been awesome with your time, and I've got just a couple more questions that I want to ask. So the first one is, as a new winery, how important is the wine club and the support of your wine club members to growing your business?
I would say it's huge. I actually took a course on wine clubs before we opened. They said, as a small winery, about 40% of your total profit for the year should come from your wine club members. Our wine club members are absolutely fantastic. We love them. Some of them are neighbors that even just come hang out sometimes. So
one day where I was there, and all of a sudden this truck's driving down our long driveway, and he was flying down the road like I would. And I'm like, who's this guy? He's driving like he owns the place. And Elisa, oh, I know who that is. He's a club member, lives around the corner. And wow. It's nice.
I think because, we're a small winery. Chris or I are there every time that we're open. We get to know those club members. We get to have a relationship with them, and to us, their family. So when they come wine tasting or bring their friends wine tasting, they're coming to a member of their extended family, and that's what we want them to feel like. So it is really important financially, but it's also important just to help you pass the word that, hey, here's a new winery to try out. We have one club member who, when we talked him into joining, he came, I think, I don't know, 6 or 7 times with different people every time. I said, hey, have you thought about joining the wine club? You've been here an awful lot, You'd
actually save some money.
Save some money, get some benefits out of this. But yeah, he's actually become a really good friend of ours too. Yeah. And we've hung out with him at other wineries. So, you never know who you're going to meet.
So one of the things, it was interesting, we were at Dariush there in California, and we met this individual as a club member, but his story was talking about going there the first time when they were out of basically a construction trailer and going back and revisiting every year. And the guy was from Arizona, and he would go back every year and just to see how things had changed, how things have grown, and to kind of feel a part of that growth of that winery to become what it's become. And that impacted me, where it's like, I want people to do that with us, to where they're there from like day one. They were there for our little, what we call the she shed tasting room, and then building our, what we call the sparkling barn, and just see us as we grow and we plant, and to every year or every quarter want to come back and say, hey, what else have you guys added on? What else have you guys grown? And because it almost feels like they're investors in the growth of the winery. And so, it's hard. You want to have that personal connection, but as it grows, it's also hard to maintain that personal connection because the numbers get big, but it's important. It was actually more important than we were even realizing at the time, when we talked about getting started and whether we wanted to open with the club, and then everyone was like,
oh my God, you have to
you have to open with the club. And so, but at the same time, we've been to wineries where it feels like you're at a timeshare event where all they do is push the club. For us, it's like, look, have a club. There are special benefits, but at the end of the day, we want someone to have a great experience. And if they want to join the wine club, great. We'll talk about it, but it's not as though you're there to hear the pitch about the wine club. You're there to have good wine. And then if you really like it, and basically if you buy enough, we just say, look, if you join the wine club, that could be your first shipment and you get a discount. And so that way it doesn't feel that kind of hard sales pitch, but yet, we're growing it and focusing really on people who would normally join a wine club, as opposed to someone who's just there to taste the wine and then to feel like, oh, I'm being pressured.
So what do you guys charge for a wine tasting at your place, and how do you come up with that number?
So we charge $25 for 5 wines. And we, for example, have the Patriarch on the list right now. We will rotate that out sometime probably in the fall with the Aligonico or one of our new releases. And we came up with that price, honestly, based off of our neighbors. We kind of looked around at what our neighbors were doing and said, well, that works for us, so that's going to be the price.
Well, that's easy.
Yes.
All right, so 2 more questions for you guys. So what are some other, besides what we've talked about already, what are some other plans you guys have for Elisa Christopher Wines in the future? And, what can people expect from you guys going forward?
So we always get a question, and I think this is more of a Texas question because I've noticed that moving back than a California or East Coast question where I moved from. And it's, do I need reservations? And we say, well, because we have a small indoor tasting room, it's 12 by 19. It is literally like a tiny house. If you want to be inside because of the weather, you need to make a reservation. Otherwise, I have 43 acres. We can spread out wherever you'd like. We can find a place for you to sit. We have a lot of outdoor furniture too. But so I would say that's definitely one thing. And then,
but as far as plans,
a bigger tasting room. So right now, we're focused on the production, and then we will build a larger tasting room as kind of the next phase of activity. And then after that, I mean, everything has a phase plan. We will build a even larger production facility that can handle more volume.
Right. So we've basically mapped out to be around 12 to 15,000 case kind of max production. But on the property, we plan on having a more public tasting room, which would be probably our next phase. We'd like to do a private kind of clubhouse that would be available for some private events with a demonstration kitchen. We'd like to be able to host people, bringing people to do some educational stuff, both on wine and on food. My little design gem is going to be, we're looking at putting a wedding venue on the property that will, if I get my druthers, it will be a nice little architectural icon on the property.
We are still leaving some areas on our property natural. So we have like a low, when it rains a lot, there's a small creek that forms, but
we'll have
have some hiking trails in there.
Yeah, we'll have about a 2-acre little lake with some waterfalls. We plan on treating a lot of our wastewater on site and going through bioswales that will then go into the lake that we would then be able to irrigate from all of our grapes.
And we want to increase our solar usage. So on our current production facility that's almost complete, we asked them to make sure the roof could support solar panels. So we could do that in the future just to be a little more on the sustainable side.
Yeah. And then planting grapes as soon as we can. The hard part is, kind of nailing down all the varietals we want to be able to have, and then kind of mapping out how much as far as acreages to those into this. And hopefully we don't have any vines that fail, that we, hopefully the Chardonnay will always be successful as far as growing, and hopefully.
But we know that you can have a vine or two here and there that'll fail.
Yeah, but we don't want to have to rip out a whole acre saying we're tired of dealing with the problems that this has. Hopefully we'll learn enough from our neighbors and friends that we won't plant something that is a headache. But we're also stubborn individuals, so if we like something, we might just try to do it anyway.
Yeah.
So
I want to say this. I can't wait to see what happens with you guys, because like you guys have so many great aspirations as far as what you want to do with your wines and your winery and everything. So I can't wait to see what happens with you. So I have one last question. Okay. So if you were going to give advice to somebody who wants to start their own winery like you guys are doing right now or did, what kind of advice would you give them?
Win the lottery.
Okay, besides that,
what I would say probably the one thing is research, but it's fun research. Go to a bunch of wineries, drink a bunch of wine, but more importantly, if you can, talk to a bunch of winemakers, and then basically kind of like you just interview them, and just say, hey, what do you like about this? What don't you like about this? If you could do one thing differently, what would you do? And then kind of, again,
I would say the other piece of advice I would offer is you have to be willing to do everything. Don't plan on, I want to be a winemaker just for the blending process. That's really a lot of fun. That's your reward for all the hard work. So be prepared to do absolutely everything on that property. There are things that I never thought as a winemaker I'd be doing. I wrote a wildlife management plan because we needed it for our property, and wrote it in 24 hours. But, you have to be willing to do everything and to pivot, because the day that you think that you're going to have at the winery is not going to be the day that you're going to have. You might come in and say, I'm going to rack this, I'm going to get this ready to bottle, I'm going to do this. And you walk in and all of a sudden you're like, oh, great, there's tank leaking. So now I need to take care of that first. You always need to be willing to pivot on what it is you thought you were going to do.
There's probably lots of ways to skin the cat, and a lot of it comes down to money. And, we know a small winery where they're basically doing custom crush. So they've hired someone to do basically the blood, sweat, and tears, and they have their tasting room. They advise they're involved with the selecting of varietals. They're involved with kind of identifying a flavor profile and the blending and the tasting, but they're paying a lot more money for someone to basically have the staff to make the wine for them. And then they have their tasting room and they're kind of owning and operating a tasting room than they are. What we're doing is just day to day, getting in, pumping stuff over, researching what yeast you want based on the flavor that you want to kind of pull out of the grape. So there's some of that. And again, it comes down to, well, if you're willing to pay a little bit more money for someone to be that. Otherwise, Lisa's right. There are some days you might have to be patching plumbing and pipe, or fixing a pump that the motor blew on it, or our son
our water has a lot of minerals in it, so you got to clean those steamers every time you use them.
So making wine is 99% cleaning. Prep and tear down. So 1% of actually doing something. It was even fun as we're doing stuff. You go into the production room, you see 5 people standing around. It's like, what's going on? Well, we're waiting for this pump literally to just flush out so that we can then squeegee everything and then sanitize it. And so it's a lot of cleaning, a lot of prep.
So anyone who is listening to this, who thought that it was going to be just this great romantic thing to have their own winery, you guys just killed it, I think, for a lot of people. Nobody's going to want to do that now.
At the end of the day, you still have to love it. I would say, despite all of that, I love what I do. Wouldn't change a minute of it.
Yeah.
It is. It's a nice break from my day job, and there are days I'd rather be doing this all day than my regular day job. So it's funny. She tries to give me my weekends to get away from it and to not have to be out there. But if I'm not out on our property, mowing, trimming, setting up another outdoor space, I get bored. I get antsy. Like, I should be out there. I want to be out there. We'll sit out on our properties. Like, how come we don't sit in our back porch like this? We're just enjoying it. It's like, but it's just different out there, And so it's, when you love it, it's never a day of work, really.
Well, you guys have been awesome. Thank you guys so much. I learned a ton, and I'm sure the listeners learned a ton about, what you guys are doing. And I'm excited for you because as a wine person and a wine fan, I think people just dream about having their own winery. Like, I'm sure you did, Elisa, and you guys, when you guys were growing up. But thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it. If I ever make it to my brother's place in Dripping Springs, I will make sure to come by. I would love to see what you guys are doing there and just experience the whole thing. So thank you guys so much.
You're welcome. We'd love to host you anytime.
Yeah.
And I look forward. I'm gonna get online. I'm gonna buy some more of that wine because there's a couple of those that I want to try. So.
Well, awesome. We appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Have a great evening. Take care.
All right. You too.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.